Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to talk about things that we appreciated from the 2025 season and what they could mean for 2026 and beyond. So highlighting Drake Maye being the late round QB, some veterans who are balling out down the stretch, a la Derrick Henry, Stephon Diggs, Tony Pollard, and maybe who could be doing things like that again in the year 2026. So again, taking time to, appreciate some things, but also always looking forward here on the Fantasy Life Show. And of course, joining me today, we got Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, I know you have been hard in the lab working on the rookie supermodel. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. So got all the data pulled and clean, but then, I have to look at each position before I put the new prospects in. So still looking at the model, testing new things. I'm working on running backs right now. I have some cool info that I'll share later. We're going to talk about some running backs. You got a couple of rookies written down. So I'm going to share some of the findings, like some new things that'll be happening with the supermodel based on the data that I found. But yeah, having a great time. Also, got all the ice cleared from the driveway, Ian. That took 2.5 hours. So working hard on the rookie supermodel and working hard on clearing the driveway. I will say I was going to come back into my office and work more that night, and my hand was barely functioning. That's just I had old man tired hand, and it was just cramping. So watch Slow Horses instead. How about that?
How about that? I will say, shoveling, guys, I did my driveway with a horrible, just not horrible, but just an old-fashioned regular shovel. I did my mom's driveway, and she went ahead and showed me this new invention. I'm not sure who came up with this, but it's actually got a handle in the middle of the shovel, so it's 2 handles total. Basically stops you from having to bend down for that extra couple feet when again you're throwing any level. So it ends up kind of being more of a bicep workout. Dwain, I equated it to kind of the invention of the forward pass. I know a lot of people are initially going to call this a sissy move, or this isn't how we did it back in my day. And I get those concerns, but man, just after doing it with that extra handle, my back felt a million times better than it normally would.
Yeah, and you sent me the picture, and I sent it to my wife, and so she is now purchasing one, and we will not get ice or snow for another 7 years, but it will be in the garage for when it happens, Ian.
Maybe some of you fellow Midwesterners out there could have a little bit more use for that than Mr. Dwain down there in Texas, but alas. Anyway, guys, let's go ahead and get into the bulk of the show. Again, you're checking out the Fantasy Life Show. We appreciate you joining us as always. Dwain, starting off with awesome things that happened in 2025 and what they could mean for 2026. Let's give some love to the late round dual-threat quarterback of the year, Mr. Drake Maye. Obviously, still has one more game left on his schedule. We'll be talking about that plenty next week, but 20.7 fantasy points per game. That was good for QB2 status behind Josh Allen. Racked up the 6th most fantasy points from purely rushing production right there at Patrick Mahomes. I mean, this was a guy who was the QB 15 and sleeper ADP. So again, it was one of those things where talking preseason, we were talking a lot about Drake Maye. Had plenty of misses, sure, but Drake Maye was one of the hits. And just, it does seem like every single year, Dwain, whether it's Lamar Jackson in 2019, Justin Fields in 2023, I think it was, there is a quarterback in the later rounds of drafts where it just seems too good to be true. But hey, at least in this year's case, Drake Maye was certainly the truth.
Yeah, I mean, and Drake Maye was, that was my most drafted quarterback this year. You and I, we drafted him a ton together over at Real Time Sports. And so fortunately, that worked out. But the ingredients that we're looking for were always there. But what's interesting really about Drake Maye, he had 5% of the team's design rushing attempts in the regular season, which is, that's slightly above average, guys, right around average. But it was the 10% scramble rate that really did it for him, Ian. A lot of the rushing yards for Drake Maye came scrambling, and him being a younger player, he's definitely mobile. He's getting more yards on those scrambles than what a lot of the guys got. But when you look at Maye, really the big thing that boomed for him this year was how amazing he was as a passer. Despite not really having an elite wide receiver core, has a nice tight end core. But if we were grading these things, we would say this is a below average to possibly bad receiving core, especially when they never play Stephon Diggs in a full-time role until you get to the playoffs. But Drake Maye still came through in a big way as far as passing yards per game, touchdowns, passing, all those sort of things. So yeah, I think this really bodes well for his future, because the thing that's the hardest to do is to really become, a high-end passer in the league. We have a lot of these guys that can run around, and we know that's going to be there. But man, now that he's demonstrated the ceiling, and imagine a world where the Patriots actually do go out and upgrade their wide receiver core, what could happen for Drake Maye in 2026?
league best efficiency marks, completion rate, yards per attempt, QBR, passer rating, pretty much everything across the board. Again, the only real weakness in this dude's game has been taking a few too many sacks, and we have seen that rear its ugly head in the playoffs. We'll see again what happens against the Seahawks. So it will be very interesting, Dwayne, if they kind of get in on these potential trade candidates at wide receiver. A.J. Brown's been talked about a lot. Brandon Ayuk seems a little bit more obvious. Even if he is traded, maybe it is just a release situation at this point. I do wonder, too, if the Cowboys have a little bit of trouble getting George Pickens signed down, if he could potentially be in those streets as well. But we'll talk more about those sort of wide receivers later. Dwayne, I want to kind of shift the focus now to potential late round quarterbacks in the year 2026 that fit a similar archetype. So the three that immediately kind of came to mind for me: Malik Willis, again, a free agent entering this offseason, but we saw what he did in Green Bay over these last 2 years. Tyler Shuck was the QB 12 in fantasy points per game after taking over in week 9. Certainly has plenty of mobility. And while, again, maybe the Saints go ahead and get in on QBs, I personally think he showed more than enough down the stretch to get QB1 treatment in 2026. And then also Kyler Murray, Dwayne, seemingly has played his last snaps in Arizona, was not nearly as, just productive as we've seen in the past as a passer last year. That said, we still do know that Kyler at his best, one of the more productive dual threat quarterbacks out there. So if you had to rank these guys, again, trying to say who could be next year's the late round quarterback, Willis, Shuck, and Murray, how would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's two different ways to think about this. If you're just purely thinking about like what the upside looks like, I would give it to Malik Willis. If you're asking me who has the cleanest path, I think it's Tyler Shuck, assuming that they don't draft a quarterback. It's a pretty weak class. If you look at Friedman's latest mock draft, he really believes there's only one quarterback that's truly round one viable, and that's Mendoza. So I would think that Tyler Shuck is probably going to be better in the Saints' eyes than a lot of the guys that would go at the end of round 1 or beginning of round 2. And so I think whenever you look at that bodes really well for Tyler Shuck. But we know in the NFL today, like the true way to get to your ceiling is if you also have that elite rushing upside. And while Tyler Shuck was strong, 9% of the team's design rush attempts after he took over the starting role, only a 5% scramble rate. Now, he was very efficient on those opportunities. I mean, if Taysom Hill's out of the picture, Ian, that would obviously help because he's the one coming in and stealing some of those design rushing attempts, especially once you get down inside the 5. And not to say they would give those kind of carries to Shuck. That is an area where I get why they do use Taysom some. But I think with Malik Willis, just with the state of the NFL game, right, and the evolution of the way defenses are playing, they're taking away the passing yards are down. They were at an all-time low since 2006. So the teams that are really having success, they have this balance on the ground, and you saw that with Malik Willis over the last 2 seasons in Green Bay with an okay supporting staff, but with a really good play caller that knows how to keep things balanced. And I think you do need a team that can keep things close. If you get on a team like the Jets, Malik Willis might turn into Justin Fields from this last year, which could equal a benching. Not saying that's for sure. Malik Willis has been good, guys, as a passer over the last 2 years. Was terrible, obviously, in his rookie year with the Tennessee Titans. Didn't have much to go with. But if you look at his 6-game sample with 80% snaps for his career, it's 14.9 fantasy points per game. That includes his rookie year. But if we just look at the last 2 years, Ian, now it is only a 3-game sample, but it is 23.3 fantasy points per game. A lot of that comes back to his ability as a rusher. So I think if he landed like with Indy, like I would be super excited about that, right? With Shane Steichen, maybe Miami. If you look at Miami, we're going to have Bobby Slowick running the offense. So I mean, I know people liked him 1 year, then they didn't like him the next year with the Texans, but like they have some weapons in Miami. But I think Malik Willis would be the one that I would go with. And again, this without we have no clue where he lands, guys. So I mean, a lot of it will come down to landing spot. But man, if it was somewhere like Indy, I would really be excited about Malik Willis. Again, I think Shuck has the cleanest path because I think he'll be the starter. What's funny is Kyler Murray, we'll see where he lands. Obviously, he would be in the convo, but I think the evolution of the NFL defense has really hurt him because as much as Kyler has scrambled around and stuff, Ian, he doesn't score the rushing touchdowns like what Malik Willis can do. He does get the rushing yards. I think you could argue of all these 3 guys, he has the biggest potential as far as passing plus rushing yard combo, but he doesn't get the rushing yards, and defenses are really stifling the pass game. And honestly, Kyler Murray's been one of the most impacted quarterbacks due to that. And I think part of that is due to his struggles with his ability to throw the ball over the middle of the field, which is really where offenses are finding their success.
I just feel like with Kyler, it's almost Mahomes obviously has had far more highs both in real life and Fantasyland over the years, but like we're just still chasing these awesome years that kind of happened in like 2021, more so for Kyler here. And it's like, well, now it's 2026, and I'm still like, wow, look at that 2021 season that Kyler managed to pull off. So getting pretty far into rearview mirror at this point. You mentioned some of the potential teams out there. So with the Colts, based on what we've been hearing, just again through the grapevines and some of these alleged insiders out there, it does seem like the Colts are going to make a play to just bring back Daniel Jones, which would make sense. So seemingly could be off the list for Malik Willis, but I'm with you, man. That would be ideal. More teams that, again, probably don't need a quarterback, but maybe they could, kind of like the Colts. The Rams, we'll see what happens with Matthew Stafford in his retirement, but they probably do want a long-term successor sooner rather than later. I listed the Saints. Again, I think they're going to roll with Tyler Shuck, but you never know. Falcons, you have Michael Penix and Kirk Cousins, but new head coach, obviously injury to Penix. Kirk Cousins not happy either. Panthers with Bryce Young, entering the last year of his deal. We'll see what happens there. And then the Vikings with J.J. McCarthy. Any of those, Dwayne, do you actually think we'll be in the market for these quarterbacks, or probably more so staying pat?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it could go either way. Like, look, if this was 2018, and not even including Kyler Murray's, previous production, like he would be number one on this list because he does carry the biggest combo. Yeah. But if I'm thinking Malik Willis, I think the other team really is Cleveland. You got Todd Monken coming in there. You've got Harold Fannin Jr., right? You have Jerry Jeudy. You still have David Njoku. They could move on from David Njoku. Like, that's a big-time possibility. You've got a nice young running back in Quinshon Judkins. You've got a good pass-catching running back in Dylan Sampson. So I think with the Browns, like, some of the pieces are actually there, right? If they were able to get a quarterback in. Now, the key is with the Browns, they also have a good defense, Ian. So theoretically, like if they could create a balanced offense that could stay in games, more like kind of like what we see from the Packers. And obviously, guys, the Packers are a really good offense. But if they could run a scheme kind of like that, that would be really an interesting fit, in my opinion, for Malik Willis, because you do have Harold Fannin Jr., and then we'll see what else that they do in the draft.
Browns certainly one of 6 teams that we are actively expecting to add to their quarterback room. We got the Raiders at 101, fully expecting to take Fernando Mendoza. Also got the Browns, Jets, Steelers, Cardinals, and Dolphins, again, as those teams where it just seems more likely than not we are going to see them invest in these guys. So we'll see where these dominoes fall, but I tend to agree Malik Willis looking a lot like the crown jewel of this quarterback class. And if we do see that sub, QB 20 ADP, I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be getting behind him as potentially the late round quarterback of 2026. Dwayne, let's move on to our second, again, thing we appreciated from last season and looking ahead to 2026, and that is offensive gurus who came into their new team and actually did make everything better. Also, we've been alive long enough, Dwayne, both of us actually, to see, these guys go into new offenses. Everyone expects things to change, and guess what? They don't at all. Hell, even look at last year. Chip Kelly, was getting a lot of hype going into Las Vegas, couldn't even finish off his first season. That said, Ben Johnson with the Bears and Liam Cohen with the Jaguars certainly did make their money and more. Ben Johnson, the Bears, led the league's 9th ranked offense in terms of points per game. They're even better in some of the EPA numbers. Meanwhile, in Jacksonville with Liam Cohen, again, wasn't the fastest start, but man, down the stretch, really were cooking him when the end of the season came unfolded. We did see the Jaguars averaging the 6th most points per game in the NFL. So again, Dwayne, a little bit of a ramp-up period, which is to be expected with any new coach, but Ben Johnson and Liam Cohen, man, really did earn every cent they were paid last season.
Yeah, I mean, number one, like they have talented, cores around young quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence obviously been in the league for a while, but these guys, were first overall picks. And so both of them got the most out of their quarterbacks, especially I would say Liam Cohen, given what we had seen from Trevor Lawrence to this period, to this point in his career. What he did over the second half of the season was truly amazing. But I think just looking at it, both of these teams were very high in shift motion. Both of these teams used play action. Both of these teams were pretty balanced, right? And that's really the name of the game in today's NFL, is really making the defense have to guard every square inch of the field. They need to respect the run. You've got to use play action. You got to do things to move your playmakers around. The emergence of Parker Washington over the second half of the season for the Jaguars and Liam Cohen fully embracing that after they lost Travis Hunter. I mean, I think that's a sign to having a really good coach that can take a player like that. And then suddenly it kind of gave me Amon-Ra St. Brown vibes, honestly, with Parker Washington. So yeah, I think these two guys, obviously, they came in, with, being guys that were being lauded for potentially really improving these offenses. And we did actually see that come to fruition. And I think that comes back to punching up the easy buttons, for their quarterbacks, getting their players in the right position, but just maximizing the personnel, man, and just keeping things mixed up as much as it may drive us crazy in fantasy. And we're going to talk about this more later, but like, when you mix in more 2 tight ends and stuff like that, you have less 3 wide receiver sets. So the Jags did use more 11 personnel. The Bears were a little more balanced. They chose to use Cole Kmet and Colson Loveland together more often, which kind of hurt Luther Burden. But at the end of the day, man, with what these 2 quarterbacks did and how the overall offenses perform, yes, I have to say that these are the 2 clear winners.
Kudos to both. Again, great 2025 and certainly expecting more from those offenses in 2026. But looking ahead to next season, trying to see who could be this year's Liam Cohen and Ben Johnson. It does seem like there's a handful of candidates. That said, Dwayne, I think we can agree this really wasn't, the hottest coaching carousel cycle that we've ever seen. That said, we do have former Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel now with the Chargers as their OC. We also have Brian Daboll, former New York Giants head coach with the Titans as their OC. Kevin Stefanski, after again being with the Browns for the better part of the last half decade, now running the Atlanta Falcons. Mike McCarthy, fresh off a year off. And again, before that was with the Cowboys, now the Steelers head ball coach. And as Ray mentioned earlier, Todd Monken, longtime Ravens OC, now back with the Browns where he was in 2019 as the OC, but now the head ball coach there in Cleveland. So among those guys, Dwayne McDaniels, Daboll, Stefanski, McCarthy, Monken, anyone that you really do think could turn this offense around in a hurry?
I'm with you. This is not a very good class, but if I have to go with someone, I do think that it is Mike McDaniels for the Chargers. I mean, when we look at McDaniels, when he got to the Dolphins, they're averaging 215 passing yards per game. They followed that up the 2 following years with 265 passing yards per game. You also had McDaniel really acting as the innovator, Ian, and really using more play action, using more of the motion at the snap, not just motion before the snap, but having your wide receiver, like a cheetah running full speed at the snap. Now, defenses have evolved to that, over the last couple of years. If we look at over the last 2 seasons, play action, targets per route, if you look at play action on routes run, it's at its lowest fantasy points per route since 2020. And the same thing for motion. So while defenses are catching up, at least I can say that when you look at Mike McDaniel, he was an innovator, right? He did come up with ways to try to battle the evolution of defenses getting smaller and faster and trying to take away these 3 wide receiver sets after Sean McVay really made that, the thing to do. So I think I would go with McDaniels. I feel like he's the one most likely to come up with a counterpunch. I think he also gels well, honestly, with what Harbaugh wants. He likes to use the heavy personnel stuff as much as he likes to, as much as he did the motion and play action stuff. He doesn't run a ton of 3 wide receiver stuff. He likes to use the 2 wide receiver stuff. He's typically got a blocking tight end, as much as it may drive us crazy. You former Mike Gesicki truthers, you didn't always see him getting on the field. He's willing to use a fullback.
We're still here, Dwayne.
Here. So I think there's a strong meld between with what Harbaugh is going to want, with what Mike McDaniel is going to do. And then they also have plenty of weapons. So that's the other thing, right? I mean, I don't know that we think any of these weapons are elite at this point. If I were to have to call one that I think still might break out and be this big time receiver, probably still is Ladd McConkey, but you've got Quentin Johnston who can do the run after the catch stuff. You've got Oronde Gadsden. Maybe that's Oronde Gadsden the second. Sorry, Oronde Gadsden Sr. That's maybe the secret weapon, for this offense with the way tight ends are really, taking over the passing game in the NFL. So I think it has to be Mike McDaniel for me, man. I got to be honest. The rest of these hires are pretty uninspiring to me overall.
It does seem like the Chargers stand out because, again, their biggest problem from last year, that offensive line, just was more of an injury issue than anything. Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater missing nearly the entire season. In Slater's case, it was the entire year. So, again, just getting 2 legit stud tackles back in action with or without McDaniel, you could, again, paint this picture pretty easily. I would say at least easier than these other spots we're talking about, of a return to something close to excellence. They also, Dwayne, just have a ton of cap room. Usually when you see these teams with a high-priced quarterback like Justin Herbert, they're more so, in the red. But, man, only the Titans actually have more cap room than the Chargers entering this offseason. So even though I do look at that wide receiver room and Oronde Gadsden, I'm like, okay, they're pretty fine. I think we can probably go into week 1 without making major additions. I mean, they actually could be a surprise contender to try to make what we could call a strength into, a superpower, if you will. So I hear you. I do get a little bit concerned just with, all right, why did Mike McDaniel's offense fall off too quickly? I think the answer is Tua regressed. That's kind of what my eyes tell me from the past couple seasons. Not the same player. Now, exactly. Tyreek Hill leaving the picture. But that's the other side of the coin, Dwayne. It was like, all right, well, is this offense fall off because Tua just sucks? Or is it because Tyreek Hill got hurt and because Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane were just really good?
Yep.
And again, the play action rate, the motion rate, those things matter. And seeing the Dolphins at the top of the league is great. And we even saw that when McDaniel was with the 49ers, basically being the run game coordinator for some of those awesome Kyle Shanahan offenses. So I think overall, I want to believe in Mike McDaniel and everything tells me that we should. But the one red flag is just like, all right, If this guy really is such an offensive mastermind, why did the Dolphins rank 25th in points per game these last 2 years?
Yeah, exactly. And we did a roundtable, myself, you, Friedman, Kendall, some other folks this week. You guys can check it out over on fantasylife.com for free. And one of the topics was the Chargers. And that was kind of the flip side of the coin, that I talked about is, was this really due to Mike McDaniel and the innovation that we saw from him, or was it really just due to Tyreek Hill and the trade they made for him being awesome and then him falling off the cliff and then ultimately getting hurt? Because once they lost Tyreek, even though they still had Jalen Waddle and they had some of these other pieces like Achane, the offense definitely did regress. Now, I do think a lot of that comes down to, again, passing yards per game at the lowest since 2006 across the league this past year. So it's not just Mike McDaniel experiencing this. It really is the league. But I will say, I think that the Chargers have enough weapons and they can be diverse enough that it's going to be tough, even if they don't make any improvements to their receiving core or their running back core, to really be able to hone in. As long as their offensive line is healthy, and my guess is they're going to add reinforcements again to that, and then they'll probably spend a lot of their free agent dollars on keeping that defense in a good spot. But I think with McDaniel, to your point, it is really fair, like how much of that came back to Tyreek Hill. On the flip side of that, you can say he did find a way to unlock Tyreek Hill in a way even better than what we had seen with Patrick Mahomes. So that still kind of sits, as a positive for me for Mike McDaniel. And I will say, again, a lot of this is we like McDaniel, but we don't love him necessarily. We think that there is enough of a question. But when you look at the rest of this list, Ian, like Brian Daboll, man, it's like, I think he's fine, but he's one of these examples, just like Joe Brady. Like, what have you done when you didn't have Josh Allen? Answer, not much. You haven't done much, and not super innovative. It's not like he's using a bunch of motion. There's nothing I looked at everything for this. There was nothing I could put my finger on with Daboll. And man, I got to say, Kevin Stefanski is a guy that I've kind of liked. Ian, I mean, listen to his EPA, his offensive EPAs since his time in Cleveland. So in 2025, minus 0.19 32nd. 2024, minus 0.19 32nd. 2023, minus 0.17 28th. Like his best mark was in 2020 when he got there, when they ranked 11th in EPA per play on offense. And I get it, guys. He has not had a lot to work with at quarterback, but I am surprised, like looking back at this data, like how quickly Kevin Stefanski found a job. This guy must be like one of the best interviewers on the planet.
Had some good things going on in Minnesota before, and when the Browns still did have that great offensive line and Nick Chubb, they can get going. But yeah, funny how that works when you actually have a better roster. You can't be putting up more points. So I hear you, man. And again, just really seeing, in my opinion, what was so rough last year was like watching Joe Flacco come out for the Browns and just look completely washed and then being like, all right, well, I mean, that sucks for Cleveland. They thought they had a guy. And then going to Cincy and looking reborn, man. So I get it. Obviously Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, that changes everything. But we're talking about Joe Flacco literally going from the worst quarterback in the NFL to certainly not being that again in a different situation. So we'll see what happens again with the quarterback situations with Cleveland, Pittsburgh, even maybe Atlanta, again, depending on how that Michael Penix knee injury is going to recover. The one thing I would say with Brian Daboll in Tennessee, Dwayne, do you think there's a chance we could see Cam Ward running around a little bit more? Because obviously whether it's Daniel Jones, Josh Allen, or Jackson Dart, Daboll really did lean into that. And Cam Ward, while I wouldn't put him at the caliber of those guys, he is someone who, again, very mobile in the pocket, and I do think has room to grow in that area.
Yeah, I agree. So the one positive I had here is that, Daboll does know how to use the, quarterback legs. It's like the ZZ Top, song. He's got legs and he knows how to use them. That's Brian Daboll. And to your point with Cam Ward, what he was doing towards the end of last season, and if you look at his RPO rate, so that leads to the quarterback has the option, right, guys, often of handing the ball off, running it themselves, or throwing a quick pass, that might be a screen or something out wide, or it could be to like a tight end underneath, those kind of things. But 16% in 2025, that was the second most. Now that's with Jackson Dart. And in 2024, he was 15th at 9%, but didn't really have a great, mobile quarterback at that point, with Russell Wilson. Well, Russell Wilson was Steelers the year before, but he had Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones ended up dealing with some injuries. But he was 9th and 5th in his final 2 years in Buffalo with Josh Allen. So he clearly did use Josh Allen in that way. So I would agree that if there is a potential silver lining here with Daboll going to the Titans, it would be his ability to potentially get more out of Cam Ward in the run game.
Obviously, some OC spots still open, so we'll continue to update you guys on those as they fill here on the Fantasy Life Show. Plenty more to get to here on this edition. First, a quick word to our friends over at Xfinity. Guys, a lot can change in 5 years, but the price of your internet will not. You can lock in your price for 5 years with Xfinity's 5-year price guarantee with no contract needed. Guys, again, Xfinity, we shout them out all the time, but for good reason, because, hey, sports are unpredictable, but your internet price should not be. You can get a reliable price for a reliable connection. Lock in 5 years of predictability. Again, 5 years, the same price, no contracts or commitments. And again, just realizing that a lot can change in 5 years. Songs are rewritten, championships are won, but no matter what changes in 5 years, the price of your internet will stay the same. You can learn more at Xfinity.com. Note that restrictions do apply. This is for select plans only. Breaking down cool things that happened in 2025 that we appreciate, but also want to look ahead and see if they could keep on keeping on elsewhere in 2026 here on the Fantasy Live Show. Moving on, Dwayne, to committee-bound running backs who actually all of a sudden got big boy, true three-down workhorse roles. Talking about James Cook and De'Von Achane. Last year, they both finished as top 6 RBs. And just, again, it's kind of looking at the entire career where Achane coming out, only has, I think, 130 touches in an injury-limited season. Oh, my God, how is he ever going to, maintain this workload for 17 games? Well, he's done that basically over the last 2 years, racked up north of 300 touches in 2025. And then with James Cook, man, total touches as a rookie, 110, got up to 281, got back down to 239 in 2024, got that new contract though, and 342 touches for a man that many considered a satellite back coming out of Georgia originally. So just goes to show, Dwayne, sometimes when we're looking at these guys and we're wondering, like, can they get the bigger workload? And, I think too often we're like, well, they're not going to. But sometimes we need to just kind of, again, expand that mindset, if you will. Don't even need to take drugs to do so. And just imagine, Dwayne, what if they do get a bigger workload? And that's what we've seen really flourish here with Cook and Achane.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something we've talked about over the last 3 to 4 years. You and I doing shows together, is you should bet on these types of talents. Historically, even if they're smaller guys, when they're playing the way that these guys are playing, and there is some draft capital involved here, right? And the team has invested in them, like, you want to bet on that, what that looks like whenever they do break out. Now, it doesn't always happen. Like, we see guys that, like Jaylen Warren, we're going to talk about him some more later. Ian, has been a guy that's looked good for a long time, and his efficiency and all those things have never led to a larger workload. But again, not a guy they spent a really strong pick on. With what we have with James Cook and with De'Von Achane, these are guys that their teams invested in, and they truly showed elite underlying data points, in their early seasons. And then we saw that role start to grow over time. It's very similar to what we saw with Austin Eckler, similar to what we saw even with Jamal Charles back in the day. So a lot of these guys that are not necessarily, 225-pound backs, they can handle these sort of roles. With James Cook, man, I still would like to see more. I know I'm probably being greedy here, but he finished, 5th in fantasy points per game, 6th in fantasy points per game in the regular season with 17.4 per game. But if you look at his utilization score, it was 13th at 76. Why? Because Joe Brady does not want to use him more in the pass game. And I get it. When you're giving a guy that many touches, that can sometimes be the thing that they're looking at, Ian. And they can be looking more at, we can't give the guy 400 touches. So how do we give him 350 instead of 400? And the way they can do that is use someone like Ty Johnson in the receiving game. I think it just drives you and me a little bit crazy, because we know that James Cook actually is one of the second and third level running backs that can get, vertical down the field and do different things that, I would say 95%, 98% of other running backs in the NFL can't do some of the things that James Cook. And I hear all of you guys snickering at me in the background. James Cook can't catch. He's just going to drop the ball. And he certainly struggled with some things there, guys. But if you put all these running backs running deeper routes, guess what? They're going to drop more balls. The further you are down the field, the more the drops can be a problem. Unfortunately for James Cook, Ian, people remember a lot of those were wide open and probably should have been fantasy touchdowns. And I think that's the thing that really sticks with us.
And again, it is a situation where in that 2023 season, 44 catches, 445 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We've seen Cook do it, but they've just, again, kind of had him take a bit more of a back seat. Ty Johnson and Ray Davis have made the most out of their opportunities as well. Bill's certainly scoring plenty of points. So I hear you on the being a little bit greedy, but we do know that's something Cook is capable of. Meanwhile, with Achane, man, we really did finally this last season see the high-end receiving capability meet him just being an absolute monster rushing the football. Number 1 in NFL history among all running backs with at least 500 carries 20s in terms of yards per carry, just ahead of, guys like Bo Jackson, Jamal Charles. No big deal for Achane through 3 years of his NFL career. So again, looking at guys who maybe are kind of viewed more so as that pass down back that can't handle a full 3-down role, and maybe who could be, the new suspects in 2026, Dwayne. The 3 I listed here, RJ Harvey, obviously need to see if J.K. Dobbins is returned to Denver, but with the full-time role, put up a lot of fantasy points, albeit not too officially. Jaylen Warren obviously had a very nice season last year. Didn't exactly take off with the workhorse role like maybe we hope with Kenneth Gainwell coming on. And then Bashaw Tootin, your favorite fantasy analyst, favorite late round sleeper, never quite overtook Travis Etienne, but man, when this dude was getting opportunities, looked like he was being shot out of a cannon, wound up posting top 14 numbers in tackles avoided and yards after contact per carry. So Harvey, Warren, Tootin, Dwayne, we're talking about fantasy football in January. I understand we have a lot of things to worry about here, but any of these guys really stick out to you as potential guys who could surge up these ranks here in 2026?
Well, on the show sheet, you told me I needed to have a 60-second elevator pitch for each one. So I think I can do each of these in 30, which would be a record. Matt, our producer I'm going to do each one, and Swing's going to fall out of his seat, producer Swing, because RJ Harvey. Okay, you said it. Dobbins is a free agent. He's a second-round pick. They're invested in him. He had a solid receiving profile with 13% target share, 22% targets per route run. So there's more meat on the bone if he gets more routes. He's currently the running back 20 off the board in early underdog drafts. Jaylen Warren, Gainwell's a free agent. Caleb Johnson wasn't very good. He's a running back 1 level receiving profile over his career, Ian. 1.43 yards per route run, 22% targets per route run. Those align with top 6 running backs over the last 3 years as well as the last 10 years. So he just needs the opportunity. Mike McCarthy, probably more willing to ride one guy than Arthur Smith. We'll see what happens, but he's running back 26 right now in early drafts. Bashaw Tootin, 4th rounder in a rich draft class. Probably a 3rd rounder in most NFL drafts, but last year we had so many different running backs that pushed him to the 4th round. ETN, a free agent. James Gladstone was high on him and actually pitched him, Ian, as one of the players that he wanted to draft and how he would use him in the interview process. So I think all of them, there's silver linings for all of them. We have to see what happens with free agency.
Well done, Dwayne. Well done. That was awesome. So again, maybe the elevator opened, but you know what? I just went ahead and took us down another floor or two because that was fantastic. So again, I do just want to remind people, because I know there were times this last year where I was being a little bit of a Bashaw Tootin hater. And it was just more so, guys, Travis Etienne was having really good moments. I just never exactly saw the path for Tootin taking over. So yeah, guess what? If Etienne's out of the picture, we should be excited about Tootin. Now there is the LaQuint Allen factor. He does, get in there and pass downs, and it could be, a Tyler Bidet sort of hindrance, Dwayne. I don't think it's going to be a situation where we're watching, Tootin missing out on 10, 15 opportunities per game or anything, but maybe just enough to hurt him. But man, when you do look at these offenses, I mean, the Broncos and the Jaguars in particular, I should say, do stand out. And I do think with Tootin, man, he's got a little, maybe could be on that like Chase Brown sort of career trajectory going on right now. I mean, that would probably be like our best case scenario here looking at Tootin in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other issue with Tootin, is the sample size was so small, it's hard to say a lot about it, right? Like he only had a 6% explosive rush rate. We really would have expected that to be higher. His targets per route run and yards per route run were not where we expected them, but they just used him in a very specific role, right? Basically, it was like every 3rd drive early in the season, they were just turning around and handing the ball off to him. So he didn't really have enough touches to be too, tough on him. But at the same time, we know that he was an explosive playmaker in college. I do think that he's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. I don't think he's elite at that, Ian. I don't think he's one of these guys that's going to be a 2nd, 3rd level, cheat code. But I do think he's certainly, has the capability to catch a swing pass if you need him to. So, yeah, I think Tootin is a guy that, man, if it runs hot out of this group of players, I mean, obviously all of these guys could move up, but Tootin, man, he's the guy that you really can get later in drafts right now. I'm not saying he's free over on Underdog, but of the guys you have listed here, he's going the latest.
Had that magical 3 carry stretch against the Bills where he was picking up 15 yards per carry, and then we really didn't see him the rest of the game. So we'll see what happens. Again, it was surprising to see such a low explosive play rate because whenever the guy gets the ball, man, he looks like one of the fastest dudes on the field. I do have a feeling he could get some of that Chase Brown, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift treatment, because there was that one play against the Chiefs where he caught the ball on the flat and basically ran to the back of his player. Vision is, again, one of those things where we see one bad example of it, and then that kind of becomes the entire story about the guy. So we'll just, calm yourself with letting one play define an entire player. We'll see what is to come again in this Jaguars backfield, because there are quite a few good veteran running backs out there in free agency who we'll be talking about in a bit. That said, Dwayne, let's talk about some veterans, running backs and wide receivers included, who actually showed out out when it mattered most, because as fun as it is to talk about the Luther Burdens and the Colson Lovelace of the world breaking out in the fantasy playoffs, they're not, the only guys who actually have had good games down the stretch. We saw Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard put up big time numbers there in the fantasy playoffs. Henry obviously going nuclear to win many of your fantasy championship. Even Stephon Diggs, though, a top 10 wide receiver during the final 3 weeks of the season. And then looking across the year as the whole, man, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne all managed to put up top 17 numbers. Again, despite being running backs that many expected to be overtaken early on by their team's respective day 3 rookies. So, Dwayne, you honestly were on top of this even going into last season, pointing out that, yeah, for every rookie, they're out there and they do good things. You'll have your Devontae Adams and your Keenan Allens of the world, as we saw in 2024, actually putting up big numbers there down the stretch. So late season excellence, not always just reserved for the youngins out there.
Yeah, and I think, the big thing that drives this, right, is we know that rookies historically, if you look at their fantasy points per game, right, by the round they're drafted in, whether you're talking about running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, like they get better historically as the year goes on. But what you have to remember is we're looking at a large sample, and there are still certain players that are carrying that, right, Ian? And we have other rookies that are not expanding in their role, that are not getting more. So it's not like the whole group, right, is definitely, improving. And then so what happens is people think the flip side of that as well. If the rookies are going up, well, then the veterans must be going down. In some cases, yes, but in a lot of cases, no. And to your point, I went back and I looked at like the last 5 years of this, last year before the 2025 season. And man, everybody talks about rookies being the league winner, but man, the veterans are all over the place in those same things. The year before, it was Keenan Allen, doing it. No one wanted to talk about that. Keenan Allen was out there scoring 18 fantasy points per game in the fantasy playoffs in 2024. So you just have to remember, guys, it all comes down to really the price. Remember, back in the olden days, rookies just went way too late in drafts. So it was super easy to throw all these darts at them and then be able to hit on them. But their draft capital in fantasy drafts, they get more and more and more expensive every year. And I'm not saying we've reached the point where you can't profit on rookies. I think you still can. But it has reached a point, Ian, where, it can be really tricky. Look at Trevion Henderson this year. Yes, you got some usable weeks out of him, but it was when Ramondre Stevenson got hurt. Look at RJ Harvey. Yes, you got usable weeks out of him, but it was once J.K. Dobbins went down. So as much as we just like to say, oh, these rookies take over, well, sometimes they also get lucky, right? And the guy that's in front of them gets hurt, and we can't always predict what that's going to be. So I really do believe like the big takeaway here is not to buy into the narrative that veterans can't help you win your fantasy league. Guys, there's so much variance tied into this. Even though we know as a group, rookies are going to get better over the year, that doesn't mean even if your rookie gets a larger role that they're necessarily going to be the one breaking fantasy football at the end of the year. Yes, it certainly can happen, but we shouldn't brush off veterans.
And look, yeah, I would rather every single player I draft be 23 years old with a history of proven production and a great offense with a huge workload. There are probably 5 or 10 of those guys per year, Dwayne, and guess what? They go in the first round of your fantasy draft. So when you are looking at some of these guys who, are getting a little bit longer in the tooth, but maybe they still haven't been all that injured. Maybe they're still in a good offense with good volume. That's when maybe you should be a little bit more willing to, again, take a chance on someone who, is a little bit old. So trying to do just that, looking ahead to 2026. Again, a lot of factors still to be remaining, but the guys I wanted to potentially talk about, Dwayne, see if there's one that sticks out to you. Terry McLaurin will be 31 in September, was banged up last year. That said, still very much the number 1 wide receiver for Jaden Daniels. Devontae Adams will be 34 come December. Was just a top 10 wide receiver, though, and if Matthew Stafford is back, we'll still be expecting big things there. Calvin Ridley, I know everyone just loves to kind of pretend like he's not a thing, but still looking like number 1 in Tennessee, coming off that broken fibula, will be 32 in December. We'll see if he's still on the team. He could be a cap casualty, but I wouldn't say it's a given. Mike Evans is a free agent right now, will be 33 in August, coming off the broken collarbone. James Conner will be 31 in May. It originally was ruled out with the ankle injury. It was actually foot surgery. Either way, he missed the rest of the year. Alvin Kamara also will be 31 in July, coming off the worst year of his career. That said, the offense did improve quite a bit, though, after he was gone. I'm not saying like because he was out, it was more so Tyler Shuck, and I think the offensive line gelling. So Terry McLaurin, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, Mike Evans, James Conner, Alvin Kamara. Any of those guys sticking out to you, Dwayne?
Well, I think the easy answer is Davante Adams because he's coming off of a good season. But I think if I were to give a second place answer, it would be Mike Evans. Still had a 26% targets per route run this year. You know, the Bucs offense obviously fell off over the second half of the season, but they have moved on and they're going to change offensive coordinators. I don't think that Baker Mayfield is an elite quarterback by any means, Ian, but I think we know that he's good enough, right? And so if the Rams still have Stafford, if the Bucs still have Baker Mayfield, I think we can still feel good about Davante Adams and Mike Evans. And one thing I would say here, guys, is while we have age curves and you hear people talk about them a lot, the age curve is not necessarily predictive to what a player is going to do in a year, right? Really what we care about is when is the cliff year that the player just falls off the map. And guess what I can tell you about that? No one knows. We don't know. We don't know if next year is going to be the year. And these things happen like they just fall off and they're gone. It's not like you just get, we can see this gradual decrease and now it's time to get off of this player. We don't really see that, especially at wide receiver. So I think with Mike Evans and Adams, they're two guys. Could they hit the cliff yet next year? Yes, it's certainly possible. But when I look at them, like I think the upside that each one of them can still present, depending on where they're going in drafts, is still something that I want to be buying into in fantasy. Again, we'll see where the ADP shake out on these players. That'll have a lot to do with it. But those are the top two for me. How about you?
To the surprise of probably absolutely nobody, I am excited about Terry McLaurin going into next year. Not just because I bleed scarlet and gray, but looking at it, man, he actually averaged more yards per catch and target last year. Like, I know it was kind of a lost season for the Commanders, and he was banged up for so long that, you know, obviously a disappointment if you drafted him and everything. But when he was out there at the end of the year, even with Marcus Mariota under center, I mean, he was making plays and doing so against the Broncos and looking like the usual stud that he has been over the years. Again, it was more of like a nagging quad and hip injury. I'm not, you know, it's not a situation where Ridley's coming off the broken just fibula. He's 31. He's not 34 like Davante Adams. And I just think, man, if we do see Jaden Daniels get back to balling like he was in 2024, we're looking at Terry just as the only guy in the offense. I'm expecting Debo to be gone. Zach Ertz is coming off that brutal surgery. I'm sure they'll have to add someone, but there is a situation, Dwayne, where Cliff Kingsbury, I do think it's a great offensive mind. He's proved that, you know, at numerous stops and everything. But if we are seeing David Blau now as OC, I do think there's a chance we see that those easy buttons press a little bit more for Terry, getting some more of those screens and maybe actually finally getting those sort of 150 targets that I believe he can earn. Now, you can argue that if he could have earned those, he would have done it already, and I do hear you there. But Terry McLaurin, Dwayne, if we are going to get a wide receiver 3, God forbid wide receiver 4 price tag, he still is a talented number 1 wide receiver with a good quarterback, which is, you know, things that we want to be targeting.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, he had a 23% targets per route run, so I mean that's solid. Like I think Terry McLaurin he's pretty much been a wide receiver 3 for his career, but he still carries that spike potential of wide receiver 2 or even a wide receiver 1 season, like what we saw 2 seasons ago, if we're talking about fantasy points per game. So yeah, I think that he's definitely in the mix as well. Again, they won't be those are not going to be players that I just will put on my that I won't put on my do not draft list. So it's a scenario where, again, it really will come down to what their prices are. Like last year, I didn't get a lot of Terry McLaurin because it was going to be a 3rd or a 4th round pick. Now, part of it did come down to injury being right. But man, this year, if he's going in round 6 or 7, I'm definitely going to be mixing him into drafts.
Certainly would be a nice price tag. Again, first of many times I'll say in the offseason, don't hate the player, hate that ADP. That said, gave a lot of love to these older veterans, but there were a lot of rookies that did do good things down the stretch as well last season. Talking late season rookie booms, Tyler Shuck, QB 12 after taking over as the Saints starting QB in week 9. RJ Harvey, after J.K. Dobbins went down in week 10, we saw Harvey work as the RB 13 afterwards. Luther Burden, the wide receiver 5 in the fantasy playoffs. Colson Loveland, the tight end 4 in the fantasy playoffs. Harold Fannin, the tight end 5 in the fantasy playoffs. So all 5 of these guys really did finally take over. Dwayne, wasn't easy, but you were ultimately happy to have any of them on your fantasy squad down the stretch.
Yeah, man. Colson Loveland, though, is the one that really stands out to me. You know, he got unleashed in that full-time role in week 16, and man, he just absolutely boomed in. He had a 99 utilization score as the starter with 16.8 fantasy points per game, led all Bears pass catchers with a 29% target share, 1.98 yards per route run. That's the 3rd best mark for a rookie going all the way back to 2011, behind only Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts. So this is a guy that really can function more like a wide receiver, Ian. He gets to operate in the middle of the field, which is really what offenses that are doing well are trying to attack, because that's where you can get at these defenses running these too high looks and things like that. And so I think when you just put it all together with the way that past defenses have evolved, with the talent you have with Colson Loveland, you get Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams is a guy. Man, people are taking Caleb Williams right now as the QB4 in fantasy drafts. So people are like frothing at the mouth over Caleb Williams. And I love Caleb. That's probably a tad high for me. But the bottom line is you've got a coordinator, you've got an ascending quarterback. I'll be honest, like I've been toying around with the idea, like even if I were to take Trey McBride at the end of round 2, and then I get to round 4 where Colson Loveland is going right now, dude, I like his name over a ton of the wide receivers and running backs that are going in that range. I mean, I think Colson Loveland is so good, like you could actually take him as your flex player. So I would say of this group, I love all the names we're talking about here. I like to love, but I love Colson Loveland.
Hey, I also just love that bully tight end strategy. Any draft strategy that has the word bully in it just really gets me excited about it. So again, kudos to all those guys. I wanted to try to take some overall lessons from it. And I will say I could have definitely included Jackson Dart in here as well. He was awesome whenever really given the opportunity. Again, had that dud against the Vikings in the fantasy playoffs, but whomst amongst us wasn't duddy against the Vikings there down the stretch. So Dwain, when I ask you to buy or sell this lesson going to 2026, don't bet against nimble first round quarterbacks. Because again, Shuck and Dart, and I'm not saying we need to be going just crazy with it. Obviously, Caleb Williams as a rookie didn't exactly come through out of borderline QB1 ADP. Jaden Daniels obviously did, but I think it's more so like Tyler Shuck, Jackson Dart. These guys were free in drafts. And if we have a quarterback, I know Shuck wasn't a first rounder, but he was, going early in the second. If we have a quarterback with a reasonable, chance to start early as like a top 50 pick and they can run, just throw that round 18 Dart at him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. It needs to be a round 18 draft. The problem is most people are drafting 14 or 15 rounds, but you should pay attention to it quickly on your waiver wire, right? If you're in a league like that. Yeah. I'll say Jackson Dart is a guy that we talked about a lot in our drafts last year as being a last round Dart, even though he might not be the starter at the beginning of the year, because he actually had a very unique profile. Tyler Shuck had an okay profile. Jackson Dart, like what he had done as a runner in college, definitely pointed towards a guy that could crack the top 6 fantasy quarterbacks if he ever got in the lineup. And that's basically what he did. Like he got right into that range. He immediately was inside the top 12. And now we will get Malik Neighbor. So yes, I would say overall, the answer is yes to your question. Like we don't want to ignore these nimble quarterbacks, especially the ones like guys, when you go back and take sacks out, which is such this pesky thing you got to do when you look at college stats, but when you look at those rushing yards per game. So that was also the thing that got us onto Drake Maye the year before and kept us on him the year after. We talked about him earlier in the show. Ultimately, it was passing that did it. But yeah, those are the kind of quarterbacks that we want to be betting on.
Don't think we're exactly going to be seeing that profile with Fernando Mendoza, who's not exactly going to be like a round 18 guy anyway. And just again, he is mobile and everything. That's why I really haven't gotten the Jared Goff comps, over the course of this draft season so far. But again, just not someone we're expecting 400 rushing yards from. Similar sentiment with Ty Simpson. Does a lot of creating in the backfield, but not always for himself as a rusher. The one wild card, though, guys, could actually be Trinidad Chambliss, obviously coming out of Ole Miss. He's currently in a battle to see if he can get one extra year of eligibility and with college football, but if not, very reasonably could be the QB3. He ran for 527 yards and 8 touchdowns. And as much as I haven't watched as much film as I want to yet about all these prospects, but if you're trying to find like the best single game performance from these last few years, for my money's worth in 2022, it was CJ Stroud against Georgia. The next year is Michael Penix versus Texas. Next year, I would say Cam Scatterbo versus Texas. Very well could have been Trinidad Chambliss against Georgia here in that, magical, if you will, Elite 8 game. Really did put the team on his back, both as a passer and a rusher. So we'll be very interested in Trinidad if he does end up rising up as a day 1 or day 2 pick. Also, Dwayne wanted to note in respect to RJ Harvey, always a spot for explosive pass catching running backs. I think the pass catching part really is the key there.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the work I've been doing with the rookie supermodel is just testing it against the model against different cohorts, right? Different thresholds of fantasy points per game over their first 3 seasons. The way the model is basically calibrated today just looks at fantasy points per game period. But I just wanted to start to look about what about guys that average at least 9.5 fantasy points, which is essentially a running back 36 over their first 3 years. But that also gives some leeway, Ian, because you might not break out and average a ton in your first year, but maybe year 2 and year 3, it gives you a chance to move up. But whenever I started to do this, man, like it's all the receiving metrics that are at the top. I won't share my screen with you guys because there's like 100 things on it. It's this big spreadsheet, but like I can see 50 rows right now that matter the most for running backs when we're talking about the way these guys look as prospects. And there's not one thing on there that says rushing. It is all receiving. So like the top ones, like yards per route run for their career, receiving yards per team pass attempt, all these things set at the very top. They're already important in the model. So the model's already calibrated to it. But when you really start to isolate to the running backs that make a difference in fantasy football, it really is all about the receiving. And so with that being said, like we're gonna be tweaking the model a little bit, Ian. Even if it means we take a little bit of a hit on the model's overall accuracy against like all prospects. Really, what we want the model to do is really help you find the guys that have the best chance to be superstars in fantasy. So we might make a little trade-off there. That's what I'm working on this week.
Do we have any taste yet, Dwain, of some running backs potentially up in the model? I know Nebraska's Emmett Johnson had 85 catches these last 2 years. Nicholas Singleton for Penn State. By the way, guys, I swear if any one of you gives Singleton the Nick Chubb comp, I'm going to be furious. He's a fine prospect, but he's not Nick Chubb. And then also with Washington, Jonah Coleman caught 87 passes during his career as well. Anyone popping off for you yet, Dwain?
I have not pulled the rookies in yet, or the draft or the prospects in yet. Like I'm still calibrating the model. Like that's step one, Ian. Like I got to get that right. But here's what I'll say. I did look at the guys that you put on the sheet. So you put Emmett Johnson on here. He's got an 11.5% career target share. That's really solid. What I'll say is, guys, like receptions are nice, but the main thing you want to look at is receiving yards per team pass attempt. Because what does that do? It helps us normalize. Are you on a team that throws the ball a lot or on a team that throws the ball not that often? This helps you normalize the data and be able to better compare guys. There are other steps I take that I haven't done with this data yet for these prospects, like I adjust it for strength of schedule, the teammates that they have to play against, that get playing time, how good is their quarterback, all these different things, average depth of target, all those things come into the model. But right now, just on the raw numbers, Ian, I would say that like the thing that sticks out about the two guys you gave me Emmett Johnson and Nicholas Singleton. Nicholas Singleton, if you look at him and his 1.52 yards per team attempt. So what that is, guys, is his total yards per team attempt. But we give receiving twice the value versus just rushing. He was over the 50th percentile, so that's pretty good. If you look at Emmett Johnson, he was in the 59th percentile in that. And those are two of the bigger the yards per team attempt is one of the bigger things in the supermodel. So I think Emmett Johnson was the one of the two guys that you sent to me that stand out. But again, I haven't calibrated it yet and normalized it for all the other things. But I think he's the one of the two you sent me that probably has the most promise.
What's going to be interesting is because widely, I feel like the consensus top two running backs are both Notre Dame Golden Domers, Jeremiah Love and then Jadarian Price. And in that situation, like Jadarian Price, man, as much as he's kind of viewed as more so like the power back, the thunder to Jeremiah Love's lightning. I mean, this dude was taking every other kick return back for a touchdown. And it's like, all right, they just use Jeremiah Love more so on pass downs. That's a more, I would say, reasonable reason not to have, a ton of receiving production when the guy you were playing against every single day, is going to be a top 10 pick. So we'll see how that ends up breaking out for Notre Dame. But very interested, Dwain. The second you put those running backs in, I got to know where Jeremiah Love stacks up because, again, dude really has been a joy to watch so far. Last thing, real quick in the last minute or two, Dwain. High-end pass-catching talents went out eventually, but they are truly better in best ball. And again, this is saying like, all right, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, Harold Fannin, they came out down the stretch and they gave you some great numbers. But I just hesitate because if you did draft Colston Loveland early, like round 7 or round 8, I mean, you really couldn't use this guy until December. Similar sentiment with Luther Burden. I know he was cheaper, but do you think, Dwain, there is something to the idea where like, man, you're being drafted as the wide receiver 3 in your offense, or you have a Cole Kmet or a Dawson Knox ahead of you? Like maybe we should be giving a little bit more pause to the depth chart concerns, albeit even with, a prospect we know to be talented?
Well, I think that we were already doing that with Colston Loveland last year. I think Colston Loveland was still a great pick last year. To your point, it did not end up helping you in your fantasy league, but he's still the kind of pick I would want to make. And the beauty was because of Cole Kmet, like he wasn't a guy going in the first 10 rounds. You could get Colston Loveland later, right? The guy that we knew had a clear path to a starting job, Tyler Warren, is the one that actually rose up the board and did give you the most fantasy value for the course of the season. But I wanted to say one thing here, Ian. So just a couple of quick things. Number one, target share by position. If you look at it, tight ends at an all-time high since 2011 and 2025 at 24%. We also saw the highest rate of 12 personnel since the 2013, 16% of the time. And then Sean McVay was the big driver of this, but 13 personnel guys. So that's when you're getting the 3 tight ends on the field, 2% almost for the league. So league highs, and we had the 3 wide receiver sets dropping. So again, NFL offenses are evolving, and I will say it's also showing up in the positional trend data, Ian. If we look at 2024 and 2025 with the kickoff rule changes versus 2021 to 2023, when defenses started to evolve and take away the pass game, wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s or wide receiver 2s, 4s, and 5s are down the worst, but all wide receivers are down in fantasy points per game. Guess what? Tight ends, all of them, every group, tight end 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, all up in fantasy points per game. Part of that is because we're getting better young tight ends in the game, but it's also the evolution of the game and what coordinators are trying to do, because we're running the ball more. It makes sense to want to have the bigger guys on the field, and they're leaving the middle of the field more open. And guess who can attack that? These young athletic tight ends.
Great stuff, Mr. Dwain. I know you and Friedman really dove into a lot of that on the latest episode of Talk Data to me, so make sure you guys check that out as well if you haven't already. But that's going to do it for us here today on the Fantasy Life Show. If you like the show, then please like the show. Always helps me hit that subscribe button as well. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.